While watching through the prequels, you may have gotten to episode 2 and wondered, wait, why didn't anyone try to go back and free Anakin's mom? How come no one even mentions it? And yeah, it would be great if someone went and freed her, but is it really so simple? There are a lot of worthy arguments in favor of freeing Shmi, and there's also a lot of legitimate snags and quandaries involved in such an endeavor. So let's do a bit of exploring into the intricacies of this delicate situation, and we'll see if it's all just a convenient plot device, or if it works in-universe, organically, and as compelling storytelling. And if it works with the themes of the saga in such a way that Shmi ends up freeing herself through her own agency. So, let's see what we find when we take a closer look. Let's start by briefly summarizing the story up to this point. In Episode 1, Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn makes a deal with young Anakin's slave owner, making it so that Anakin wins his freedom while helping the Queen. Unfortunately, although Qui-Gon did try, he was unable to convince Watto to free Anakin's mother as well. The next day, there's a battle on Naboo, Qui-Gon dies, and the movie ends. Then, in Episode 2, we see 10 years have gone by, and we learn Anakin has not had any contact with his mother in that time. And for all he knows, she's still a slave on Tatooine. Now, naturally, the argument is that at some point, Anakin's mother could have and should have been freed by either the Jedi or Padmé. And yeah, Qui-Gon tried, and it would have been a great thing to do. But like everything in the prequels, it's a tricky conundrum. But could it be the way in which Shmi's story arc is handled in the movie is the most workable option available? And though perhaps a little tricky, is it the most streamlined, the least contrived, and the best at facilitating all the necessary story elements? I mean, for starters, in the grand scheme of the story, why is it important that Shmi remains a slave on Tatooine? The most obvious reasons are, 1, to become part of the Lars family. The Skywalkers need to get connected with the Lars. Free or not, Shmi needs to remain on Tatooine and marry Cleigg. And 2, so Anakin's fears and guilt will fester and explode, which give him a taste of the dark side. Like Anakin's redemption, Lucas wanted the story of Anakin's fall to revolve around his connections with his family.
I won't lose you the way I lost my mother.
Now, you might be thinking, that's all very convenient for the story, but it still makes the Jedi and Padmé look bad for not freeing her. And that's fair enough. So, let's start with the Jedi and look at the 2 most commonly given reasons as to why the Jedi should free Shmi. 1, they owe it to her. And 2, it would put Anakin's worrying at ease.
I don't know why I keep dreaming about him.
However, there are a lot of reasons why it's not quite so easy. The most obvious reason is the Jedi simply don't have jurisdiction to free her. Tatooine is an independent planet outside the Republic, and they don't bend rules like Qui-Gon. Doing so opens a messy can of worms on many levels. And even in our world, agencies like UNICEF and Human Rights Watch discourage the purchasing of slaves in order to free them, which only helps perpetuate the slave industry. And besides, with what money would the Jedi buy her? It's safe to assume they receive their funds from the government via taxpayers. Would the Jedi really be able to use this money to break interplanetary law? That wouldn't go over well. Nor can they practice nepotism or favoritism. What about another Jedi's uncle or cousin or neighbor? Are they going to free everybody associated with a Jedi? Where would they draw the line? Why should a Jedi receive special treatment? Which actually brings up the big question at the heart of it all. Having grown up with his mother and leaving her at an age when he was still emotionally dependent on her, should Anakin's training have been more tailored to where he was at? To briefly explore this, let's start with the reality that the Jedi faced a conundrum in allowing Anakin into the Order. For any other organization, one could argue its leaders should free the mother of a slave child they bring in. But the Jedi Order is not like other organizations in that they strive for non-attachment and mastery of their emotions. Many on the Council initially didn't want to induct Anakin because they saw his fears and attachments were too strong. But when they confirmed the Sith had returned and that Anakin may be the one to vanquish this cause of unbalance, they made an exception for the greater good of the galaxy. And the fact that they can't free Anakin's mom should, in theory, fall right in line with his training. So, the next question is, would freeing Shmi for Anakin's sake also have been for the greater good of the galaxy? As a Jedi, it's Anakin's responsibility to overcome his fears of loss. Freeing Shmi may have temporarily alleviated some of his fears, but in turn spoiling the chance for him to learn to master them. But was he capable of doing that at such a vulnerable stage in his development? Should his mother be in his life to some degree until he develops into an independent person? Possibly. However, the Jedi probably wouldn't have even known how to go about such an unorthodox training, so they stuck with what they knew. And I think Anakin tentatively being the chosen one is why so many of the Jedi figured he'd take to the Jedi life like a fish to water. I think we have to consider that could also send the wrong message to Anakin. Specifically, that it's okay for a Jedi to go around doing whatever they want to do to indulge and fulfill their own wishes, like some vigilante. Which is a slippery slope to say the least, and Palpatine already fosters enough of that in Anakin as it is.
It is only natural.
Plus, now, remember, even when Shmi eventually was freed, she didn't inform Anakin. She knew, as the Jedi did, it was best he move on, and she was at peace with that. She knows he was born for a bigger purpose, and it's out of her hands now. She was happy and proud knowing he had a good life serving the galaxy and didn't want to be a distraction. She didn't even say anything in response to his promise to come back and free her, other than,
"No. Be brave. And don't look back. Don't look back."
But as we see, Anakin didn't want to let go of that part of himself, and the Jedi overestimated Anakin's willingness and ability to do so. And they were unaware of Palpatine's dark influence over him, as he was fostering within Anakin a sense of entitlement and warping Anakin's natural inclinations into greed, while justifying it as a life
Of significance, of conscience.
Which leads to another point. If Padmé or the Jedi did free her, Palpatine is bound to know about it, either through his association with them or likely from Anakin. And Palpatine knowing she had been freed would open too high a probability that he'd be behind whatever inevitable tragic demise she would meet. This of course gives him too much power over such a crucial turn of events, thus creating a contrived feeling in the writing. Palpatine already does enough in the story. We don't need him behind Shmi's death as well. Her death was sad enough as it is. This would just add insult to injury and make Palpatine way too omnipresent, pulling all the strings of the story. I see Anakin and Shmi's relationship as sacred. It's the heart of the saga. Putting Palpatine's hands in there just makes it too profane. Realistically, if Palpatine wanted something to happen to Shmi, wouldn't he arrange to have her freed himself and then secretly orchestrate something to happen? Life on Tatooine is dangerous for both slaves and the free, and Palpatine undoubtedly knows of Anakin's attachment, so it seems he was content to allow the hands of fate to do their work. And as explored in E.K. Johnston's book, where Padmé attempts to free Shmi, Palpatine gets involved in the political side of it, and that darn bill just keeps getting stalled. Not to mention, Padmé's people end up realizing they're in over their heads. In reality, it's just not as easy as it sounds on paper. And for every slave they did manage to free, another one just took its place. Which brings us to the reasons given that Padmé could and should free Shmi, which are pretty similar with the Jedis. It would be nice, she owes it to her, and it would possibly ease Anakin's mind.
I miss her.
But now, let's go over some of the reasons why Padmé can't, at least story-wise. Let's say Padmé does try, but fails. Then what? Does she tell Anakin and make things awkward? If she was unsuccessful or couldn't find Shmi, telling him would just make him worry more. Why rub salt in Anakin's wounds? Or does she not tell him and keep the whole thing from him? Or if Padmé does try and succeeds, does she still tell him or not? Would it feel like Anakin ends up really liking Padmé because of this? If she does tell him, when was she going to? Whether failing or succeeding, both options end up being prickly. And perhaps it's fine if Padmé tries and fails. But, like it or not, for the sake of brevity and simplicity, I think it works better to just not get into it in the films. My idea would be, sometime between leaving Tatooine and arriving on Coruscant, Padmé could ask Qui-Gon if something could be done for Shmi. He informs her that he'll do what he can and that it's best left as a Jedi matter for many reasons. And as we know, she respected Anakin's dream to become a Jedi and all that entailed. So she left it at that. And though she occasionally disagreed with Qui-Gon, she always deferred to him. And arguably, that could be in the film, but I think it would be too cumbersome. Being such a heavy issue and Padmé already dealing with Naboo, there's no smooth way to have it in there without wobbling up the momentum. During the Japor snippet scene, Padmé knows Anakin misses his mother and promises to take care of him. It seems implied she understands there's little that can be done about Shmi for now.
Who's your mother?
And of course, Cleigg.
Shmi is my wife.
Why take such an important part of Cleigg's story and his active role in the saga away from him by having others free Shmi? I feel the story benefits most from having he and Shmi meet and he frees her. It gives their marriage the proper gravity. I see it as more romantic and poetic this way, much like it was love that freed Anakin from his chains to the Emperor and Han from his stasis in carbonite.
Someone who loves you.
The fact that Shmi was left a slave and that Anakin was left unaware of her well-being is what everything hinges on. It's not an oversight. This is literally the very heart of the story that drives the plot and plays a major role in Anakin's gradual fall to the dark side. And it wasn't just conveniently made to be this way. No, the characters don't conveniently forget about her. The films, as well as real-world knowledge, give ample explanations as to why Shmi's situation is the way it is. The underlying point is, for Anakin, never being able to go back and free his mom had a big impact on his psyche. His mother remaining a slave is a bit of a source of resentment, but the emphasis lies more so in the personal fear, pain, and guilt of leaving her, which he buried. And over that ensuing decade, all that frustration and negative emotion was building up like a pressure cooker. And when his mother died, he couldn't hold in all those bottled up fears and frustrations any longer, and they suddenly erupted. And this pain and guilt are the fuel which drive his quest for the power to stop death.
I won't fail again.
Qui-Gon and Shmi both had faith in Anakin to eventually, not immediately, adopt the Jedi way. No, he didn't fully understand everything at age 9, but his opportunity came when it did, and everyone involved was going to have to adapt accordingly. When Qui-Gon realized he wasn't going to be able to free Shmi, he didn't seem any more worried about Anakin's potential to follow the Jedi way in the long run.
Anakin.
He told Anakin the Jedi life is not easy, and believed in him to one day come to understand everything and rise to his challenges in the course of time, either way. Training as a Jedi, Anakin needed to come to a place of moving on for the greater good, and accepting the changes he can't control. And it's possible he could have, had he been fully dedicated and Palpatine wasn't around. Yes, it's a lot to ask of a kid, and he had to grow up too fast. This is the quandary the story revolves around, when a regular person is brought in to the Jedi fold. And therein we have the question the story revolves around. Which path will Anakin choose? And we don't know how much difference it would have made if Anakin had known his mother was free. Maybe a little, maybe a lot. Because either way, the crux remains. Whether free or enslaved, she would never be immune to calamity. And Anakin must get to a point where he can remain equanimous about the fact that she can't be around forever. At what point would she be safe enough for Anakin's satisfaction? I also tend to think Palpatine would still have plenty to work with on Anakin in either case. The only wrinkle I see in the way it's depicted in the films is that some people think it makes the Jedi and Padmé look uncaring. But even as E.K. Johnston explored, doing the right thing isn't always as easy as it might sound on paper. But still, should an effort have been made to free Shmi, to tailor Anakin's training? That question might not be as easy to answer as one might think, but I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. Thanks for watching.